Welcome, everyone. My name is Anita Slate. I'm a library assistant here at River Falls Public Library. And I am so thrilled to host, well, we are all thrilled to host Ken Krueger tonight, who we had scheduled last fall, but then COVID reared its head and we had to cancel. And I was so bummed, and I had pages of notes and they didn't go anywhere, and now I can't find them. But he really doesn't need a long introduction, thanks to his humble and kind writing, his rising star, and his short hop across the border. He's pretty well known in these parts. But since his first Cork O'Connor book, Iron Lake, came out in '98, he just published Fox Creek, his 19th. He also has 3 standalone novels and is in the 10,000 Lakes anthology. He's won or been nominated for numerous industry awards: the Barry, the Anthony, the Dillis, the Lefty, the Lovey, the Midwest, the Minnesota, the Northeast Minnesota, and the Loft McKnight Awards. And he's been on almost every major bestseller list, especially of late. So finally, just a reminder, we are taping and streaming tonight. So if you have any questions online, or write them in the comment section, we will ask them at the end. And also, if you have questions, hang on to the end. So welcome so much, Ken Krueger.
I have to tell you, Anita, on that side of the St. Croix, it's pronounced Krueger. But you know, when I come to Wisconsin, it suddenly becomes Krueger. I'm easy. You can call me whatever you want to. Hi, folks. Thanks for coming out this evening. I really appreciate it. As Anita said, we were all set to do this last year. And then about 5 days before I was scheduled to do a 60 appearance tour, we canceled everything because of the Delta variant. So I was holding my breath this year. And here we are. And it's so good to be in front of a live audience again. During the 2 years of the pandemic, I did no personal appearances, but I Zoomed about 400 times with book clubs and bookstores and conferences. And, maybe that was the only silver lining of the pandemic. We learned that there are all kinds of ways to create community, and you could do it virtually. It's not exactly the same as being in person, but we could connect with one another and carry on, and with family and friends. And that was an interesting I have Zoomed with book clubs all over the world as a result of the pandemic. So I'm not going to thank the pandemic for that, but and I have to tell you, it's just lovely to be here in River Falls this evening. It's very quiet here. It's very peaceful. You may know or may not know, because you're Wisconsin people, that we are in the middle of the Minnesota State Fair. Across the 12 days of the State Fair, 2 million people pass through the gates. I live 2 blocks from those gates. We have just entered hell. So it's really lovely to be here at a nice, peaceful place for a change. You know, I'm here to talk about Fox Creek for sure, because that just came out last week. But I'm going to give you a twofer this evening. I'm not only going to talk about Fox Creek, but I'm going to talk about the book that's coming out next year. A book I'm really excited about, a standalone that will be called The River We Remember. So I'll talk to you about both of those this evening. But first, Fox Creek. So Fox Creek has a contemporary setting. It's more or less today. The book that came out in the series last year, a book called Lightning Strike, was a prequel to the series. It took place, excuse me, in the early 1960s when Cork was an adolescent. The year before that, I had no book out because it was the pandemic and publishers simply weren't bringing out books that they thought might be big during the pandemic. The year before that, I brought out This Tender Land, a standalone. And the year before that, 2018, Ancient History Now, was the last book in the Cork O'Connor series that had a contemporary setting. It was called Desolation Mountain. Anybody here remember Desolation Mountain? Okay. I'm guessing, though, that those of you who raised a hand don't really remember how Desolation Mountain ended. I left Henry Malou, our beloved Mide, Henry Malou, in a really precarious situation at the end of Desolation Mountain. I'm going to read to you the last few lines of that novel, just to remind you of where I left Henry Malou. Small drops of rain hit lightly on Stephen's face. He had come to the old man with a heavy heart, and he hadn't spoken yet the real truth that brought him. He summoned all his strength of spirit. "Henry," he said, "I had the vision again." The old man waited. The fire popped. Embers flew like glowing bits of a shattered dream toward the black night sky. This time I found the courage to look at the great terrible thing at my back. It had nothing to do with what happened on Desolation Mountain. The old man turned his face to Stephen, his skin cut by the lines from a century of erosion, his eyes like ancient stones. "And what did you see?" Stephen looked long and deep at this man who had taught him so much about life, whose spirit was the truest he had ever known. He said at last the words which nearly broke his heart. "I saw you dead." Henry's smile was comforting. His old hand, when he placed it over Stephen's, was more warming than the fire. He let silent moments pass before he spoke in the soft voice of acceptance. "I know." So at the end of Desolation Mountain, we have an inkling of Henry's end. But I got to be honest with you, I had no idea what to do with that situation. And as you can see, it took me 4 years to figure it out. But that's really what's at the heart of the story of Fox Creek. It really is Henry Malou's book. And I'm going to read you the prologue from Fox Creek just to give you an idea of how I bring the reader in to remind them that this is Henry's book and his situation. It's very short. It's just a little over a page. He's an old man with more than a century of living behind him. When he rises each morning, there is no part of his body that doesn't feel the weight, the ache, the wear of all those years. Although he moves more slowly now, he still unceasingly walks the forests, with which he has been in intimate communion since he was a boy, spends full days alone in the great North Woods. His disappearances have become a cause for concern among those who care about him, and there are many, not only on the Iron Lake Reservation, but also in the town of Aurora and across much of Tamarack County, Minnesota. When he returns from a long absence and sees the worry on their faces, he smiles and asks, "What are you afraid of?" Their answers are vague fears for his safety. "If I lie down somewhere on a soft bed of pine needles and begin my journey into the next world without a chance for you to say goodbye, you can always burn tobacco and send me your prayers. I will hear," he promises. His body is a thin wall between this world and that which awaits him beyond, but sometimes his spirit travels between these two worlds. He has occasionally flown like an eagle and seen from a high place his own body lying as if lifeless under a canopy of pine boughs. He understands his death is an experience neither to fear nor to welcome. It's simply a place toward which he has been walking since the moment of his birth. The world around him is one that has both showered him in delight and presented him with enormous challenge. The delight has always been in nature, in the beauty it has offered, the solace, the lessons, the wisdom, the healing, the communion of spirits. The challenge has been of the human kind. At the hands of human beings, he has experienced cruelty, pain, deceit, avarice, jealousy, hate. Most of his life, he has been a healer, working in the ways of the natural world to help guide others to a place of harmony. It is the purpose to which he was born. But he feels the pull of another calling now, one that despite his age and knowledge and wisdom, he doesn't understand. It is a dark calling, melancholy and unsettling. As he walks the woods in the communion of spirits, he asks for answers which have not come. Patience has always been his grounding, but he feels himself growing restless and uncertain. He feels he is being followed, but not by anything human. Death is his shadow. The prospect of his own death isn't what troubles him. It's the sense that death will come to others, come far too early in their journey through this world. What the old man, this ancient soul, is trying to understand is this: am I the one who stands between death and the others, or am I the one who leads death to them? Okay, so here's the down and dirty on Fox Creek. A stranger, a woman named Dolores Morrisseau, has come to Crow Point seeking the help of Henry Malou and his great niece, Rainey Bissonnette, who is Cork's wife. They are both healers. Although she doesn't realize it, she's being followed by a group of ruthless mercenaries who believe she possesses information important to people in powerful places. In order to avoid capture, Henry Malou leads these two women deep into the boundary waters, where he has to use all of his wiles to try to stay one step ahead of the pursuers. Now, Cork, of course, when he understands the situation, leaps in pursuit, but darkness descends, along with a late winter snowstorm that blocks his way. And in the longest, darkest night of his soul, Cork's greatest fear becomes his understanding that he probably won't be able to save the people he loves. But the real question at the heart of Fox Creek is this: will this be the last journey Henry Malou makes into the beloved wilderness he has called home for more than 100 years? And I'm not going to tell you what happens. So, I write mysteries, and a mystery is a very tightly woven fabric of storytelling. Everything depends so significantly on everything else. And I think that the success of a mystery depends in large measure on the timing of the reveals. When do you give the reader the clues that are going to be necessary for solving the mystery at the heart of the story? So typically when I write a story in the Cork O'Connor series, I think that story through as completely as I can before I ever put my fingers to the keyboard. At the end of that thinking process, which could take weeks or sometimes even months, I know how the story begins. I know how it ends. I know who did what to whom and why. I know the themes I want to weave through the story. But Fox Creek was a horse of a different color. Going into this book, I really didn't have the slightest idea where the story was going to go. And I just sort of hope that if there's this guardian angel for writers, my guardian angel would help guide me somewhere safe. And I got to tell you, my guardian angel did a great job, because I love where I ended up in Fox Creek. I love this book. I'm going to do something, I'm not the most confident writer around. And so when I finished the manuscript for Fox Creek, I wasn't sure if anybody else was going to like it. But it turns out there are lots of anybody else's out there who do like it. So I'm going to do something that's very un-Midwestern. I'm going to toot my own horn. So Fox Creek has already received a number of starred reviews from important review publications. It's been on lots of lists of best books of the season. It was chosen as an Indie Next pick, which is important among all of the independent booksellers, around the country. And I learned last week that Fox Creek is the #1 book put on reserve in libraries across the country right now. Thank you, Anita. You know, I may never hit the number one on the New York Times list, but I'm number one with library patrons, and that's even more important to me. Okay, that's Fox Creek. Let's talk about next year's book. To remind you, the book is called The River We Remember. You know, I know that the pandemic created a great deal of chaos and tragedy in many, many lives. But I have to tell you a little guiltily that for me, the last 2 years have been probably the most productive I have ever experienced as a writer. And I think that was in large measure due to the fact that I wasn't going around the country doing these kinds of events. I could only stay at home and really focus on my writing. During the pandemic, I wrote the manuscript for last year's novel, Lightning Strike. I wrote the manuscript for Fox Creek. I wrote 4 novellas, and then I didn't have any more ideas. So I looked back and saw something that I had put on hold a very long time ago. Let me tell you what that was. 13 years ago, a story idea came to me that wasn't a Cork O'Connor novel. And when I proposed that project to my publisher, they didn't want it. In fact, they called me out to New York City in kind of a panic and set me down and said, "Kent, we only want Cork O'Connor novels from you." So I knew if I wrote this story, it was going to be a risky prospect. Clearly, my publisher wasn't interested. I had no idea if anybody else would pick it up. But it was a story that spoke to me in such a compelling way that I knew I had to write it. And across the course of the next 3 years, without a contract, I wrote the manuscript that became Ordinary Grace. Now, even though my publisher had told me they didn't want it, when I finished the manuscript, I went ahead and sent it to my editor at Simon & Schuster. She fell in love with it. She said, "Of course, we're going to publish it," and they did. And Ordinary Grace has had just this really remarkable, really gratifying reception from critics and readers alike. It won tons of awards when it came out. It's been translated into more than 24 foreign languages. So far, it's sold about 1 million copies. And when my publisher saw how well that book was doing, boy, did they want another book just like it. So I signed a contract for a companion novel to Ordinary Grace. They paid me a shitload of money, and I spent the next 2 years writing what I thought would be the companion novel. Now, that manuscript was contractually due to my publisher 7 years ago. 2 months before that contractual deadline, I set up a meeting in Chicago to talk to my agent about revisions to the piece because there were problems with it. I knew it, she knew it. 2 days before we got together, I sent her a note saying, "When we meet, I don't want to talk about how we revise this piece. I want to talk about how we keep it from being published." Because it wasn't the story I had imagined it would be. I had no idea how to make it that story, at least at that time. And frankly, my heart wasn't in it. My publisher turned out to be really understanding. They said, "Fine, you don't have to give us this manuscript, but you still owe us a companion novel." So here's what was going on. The expectations for that follow-up novel were enormous. And the whole time I was trying to write the story, I just felt crushed by the weight of all those expectations. And the truth is, when I was writing it, what I was doing was trying to meet everybody else's expectations instead of writing the story that spoke to me from my heart. But as soon as all that weight got lifted off my shoulders and I felt free again, I saw so clearly the story I should have been writing, the story that did speak to me from my heart. And that story became This Tender Land. Thanks. So a few of you have read it. Good. So when I ran out of ideas, I looked back at the projects that I had put on hold, and I picked up that manuscript that I had set aside and I began to read it. And as I read it, I realized I know how to tell this story now. And so for the last 8 months, I've been at work revising that manuscript to become the story called The River We Remember. I'm going to do something that's, I don't know if any other authors do it. It's pretty odd. But I'm going to read to you from the book that's coming out next year. I'm going to read you the prologue for the river we remember. And I'm doing it for a couple of reasons. First of all, I want to begin early exciting you. But it's also very short. That's a reason I like to read it. It's just a page long. The other reason I like to read it is that, honest to God, I love this prologue. So this is how I will be bringing readers into the river we remember. The Alabaster River cuts diagonally across Black Earth County, Minnesota, a crooked course like a long crack in a china plate. Flowing out of Sioux Lake, it runs 70 miles before crossing the border into Iowa south of Jewell, the county seat. It's a lovely river, filled with water that's only slightly silted, making it the color of weak tea. Most folks who've grown up in Black Earth County have swum in the river, fished its pools, picnicked on its banks. Except in spring when it's prone to flooding, they think of it as an old friend. On quiet nights when the moon is full or nearly so, and the surface of the alabaster is mirror still and glows pure white in the dark bottom land, to stand on a hillside and look down at this river is to fall in love. With people, we fall in love too easily, it seems, and too easily fall out of love. But with the land, it's different. We abide much. We can pour our sweat and blood, our very hearts, into a piece of earth and get nothing in return but fields of hail-crushed soybean plants or drought-withered corn stalks or fodder for a plague of locusts. And still we love this place enough to die for it or kill. In Black Earth County, people understand these things. If you visit the Alabaster at sunrise or sunset, you're likely to see the sudden small explosions of water where fish are feeding. Although there are many kinds of fish who make the Alabaster their home, the most aggressive are channel catfish. They're mudsuckers, bottom feeders, river vultures, the worst kind of scavengers. Channel cats will eat anything. This is the story of how they came to eat Jimmy Quinn. Don't you love that? You know, the river we remember is truly a mystery. It's the story of how Jimmy Quinn ended up as fish food. But you know, it's a whole lot more than that. Those of you who have read Ordinary Grace, you may remember that one of the areas that I dealt with kind of peripherally were men like my father. My father, at 18 years of age, enlisted in the military and went off to fight in World War II. He went away a boy, and he came back a man wounded in many, many ways. And he was so much like the fathers of my friends, men who went away to World War II or to the Korean conflict, boys, 18 or 19 years old, and they came back men, terribly wounded by the things that had happened to them, the things they participated in, and the things that they saw. I wanted to talk more deeply about that great wounding and how, when these men came back, did they find a way to heal? And I wanted to talk about the people they left behind, those who loved them and fought their own kinds of wars and were wounded in their own ways. How did all of these people find a way to help one another heal? And that's what the river we remember is really about. From a story I didn't know how to write has come a story that I believe in deeply. And God willing, I'll be back here next year to talk to you about it. Yeah. Those are all my prepared remarks, but now we're going to open it up to questions. And I think Anita is going to come around with a microphone. But probably we need the microphone because we are live streaming and we need the people on the audience to be able to hear, although I could repeat the question as well. Okay, so if you have a question, why don't you raise your hand and I'll be glad to call on you and do my best to give you an answer. And if I don't see any hands up, we're all going to go over and have a drink. There's a bar down the, oh yeah.
Although I could consider the drink too.
Okay.
So when you've gotten a final version of your manuscript and you send it off, how long does it take before it's out there for people to read?
Okay, the question is about the process of publication. When I have completed a manuscript and sent it off to my publisher, how long does it take before it actually comes out? Okay, here's how the process works. I'll sort of give you start to finish. So when I complete a manuscript in the Cork O'Connor series, and I have made it the very best manuscript I can possibly make it, the first people that see it are my agent and her group of readers. They usually have it about 6 weeks. Then they send it back to me with their suggestions and comments, which is extraordinarily important to me. I make revisions based on their suggestions, and then I send it to my editor at Atria Books, Simon & Schuster. My editor has it for about 6 weeks, and then it comes back to me with his comments and suggestions. I make those revisions, then I send it back. At the publishing house, they do a final read and make any more additional suggestions they want to make. Then the next thing that happens is I see the copy edited manuscript. So when it comes back, like your papers came back from your English instructor with all the red stuff on it, yeah, I tell you, I never feel more stupid than when I receive my copy edited manuscript. I thought I knew grammar. I address those revisions and send it back. The next thing I see comes about 6 to 8 weeks after that. That is what we call the first page pass proofs. It's a galley of what the book is actually going to look like on the printed page. And I have a chance to go through and make sure that all the corrections, all the revisions, everything appear in that galley. I send it back. About 6 weeks later, I get the second page pass proofs, and I'm so tired of looking at the manuscript by then. It's usually just a cursory examination. And then I send it back, and then the book, what happens after that then is, in the meantime, they have been designing a cover to go along with the story. We are sometimes we seek dust jacket quotes from other writers to tell you that Kent's next book is the best thing since the Bible. And the book finally is produced about 8 months after I turn it in. It's a long process. It's a Zen exercise in patience, but the finished product is one that will contain very few errors and looks beautiful. I am so grateful that I have a publisher who's so careful in dealing with my manuscript and making sure that what gets into your hands is as flawless, as powerful as we can make it. There, did I answer your question?
Yes, sir.
All right, probably a longer answer than you wanted,
Oh, I
right?
like that.
Okay, yeah.
How did you invent Henry Malou?
Yeah, the question is, I get this one a lot. The question is, how did I invent Henry Malou? I want a show of hands, those of you who might not be familiar with my work. Who does not know who Henry Malou is? Okay, for those of you who raised a hand, that means that you're really not familiar with my work. You haven't read my Cork O'Connor novel, right? Get out. No, that's okay. That's one of the reasons I do these things. I hope before you leave tonight, you'll buy one of my Cork O'Connor novels. So Henry Malou is, he is probably the central recurring character aside from Cork O'Connor in all of the novels in this series. Henry Malou is the nearest thing I write to a stock character, the wise old medicine man. Henry is a midday. He's a member of the Grand Medicine Society. He is, in fact, a healer. He's 105 years old as I'm writing him now. He's pretty ancient. Henry is the guy, he's Cork's mentor. He's the guy that Cork turns to whenever he can't quite understand what's going on. And Henry never gives him an easy answer. Typically, Henry will present him with a riddle. And when Cork has solved the riddle, he understands the wisdom that Malou is offering him. Henry is a wise old medicine man, and he's courageous, and he's compassionate, and he's funny, and he farts a lot. And he is the favorite of so very many readers of the series. So as I have thought about Henry's End, I have thought very carefully about how to deliver to you an end that is befitting a man of Henry's stature. So that's all I'm going to say. What else? Yeah, right there.
Where did your interest in Anishinaabe come from?
And you pronounced it very well. So the question is, where did my interest in the Anishinaabe culture, the Anishinaabe, where did that come from? Do you know, I have to be really perfectly frank with you. My interest in the Ojibwe came as for very mercenary reasons. Here it is. My father was a high school English teacher, and when I was 18 years old, he insisted I read Ernest Hemingway. I fell in love with Hemingway, and I tried for way too long to write the great American novel as Ernest Hemingway might have written it. Stupid on so many levels. But I went through a midlife crisis in my early 40s and decided, the hell with trying to write the great American novel. I want to write something somebody might actually want to read. So I looked around me to see what people read. You know what everybody reads? They read mysteries. It's a genre whose appeal cuts across all socioeconomic levels and all ethnic groups and all age demographics. So I decided I'm going to write a mystery. But here's a confession coming from a mystery writer. Before I began to write mysteries, I didn't read them. Yeah, my father, the high school English teacher, had convinced me that mysteries were the poor stepchildren of literature. So I didn't even read Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys when I was growing up. And I had a lot to learn. And so I began by just reading voraciously in the genre. And one of the very early writers I had the good fortune to stumble across was a mystery writer named Tony Hillerman. Yeah, how many know Tony Hillerman? Most of you, okay. For those of you who didn't raise a hand, Hillerman was an icon in the mystery genre. He wrote a series that was set in the Four Corners area of the Southwest and dealt significantly with the culture of the Navajo, the Diné. And when I read Hillerman's work, I thought, this is amazing. He writes these wonderful mysteries, compelling mysteries with a profound sense of place, and he's able to weave this really interesting cultural information into the stories. And I thought, you know, nobody's doing that with the Ojibwe here in Minnesota. Maybe I should give it a shot. What did I know about the Ojibwe at that point? About what every white person knows about the natives that we live shoulder to shoulder with, nothing. But I was a cultural anthropology major in college. And so the idea of learning about this culture, not my own, was exciting to me. And I began in the way all academics begin. I began by reading. Then in the course of my research, I began to meet members of the Ojibwe community and form relationships that have over the years become important friendships to me. These days, when I finish a manuscript, if deadlines will allow me, I give my manuscript to at least one, but usually two of my Ojibwe friends to read and vet, so that I haven't said anything that's stupid or even worse, offensive. I am painfully aware whenever I sit down to write a Cork O'Connor novel that I'm a white guy trespassing on a culture not my own, and I work very hard to get it right, to be very respectful to the culture. So I got to share this with you. Without exception, I can say this truthfully, without exception, every Native reader that I've talked to or who has bothered to contact me has been complimentary in terms of how they feel that I've dealt with their culture. I got an email a while back that went something like this. Dear Mr. Krueger, I am the tribal librarian for the Lance Reservation, which is up on the UP of Michigan. When any of our tribal members come into the library and they're not quite sure what they want to read, I will often recommend your books, because for a white guy, you do a pretty good job. What else? And yeah, right there.
At one time, you used to let people into your books with their names, and they paid you for that. Do you still do that?
Yes. The question is, at one time in my career, I would put people into my book as a character because they paid me to be there. Yes, that's true, but it's not as bad as it sounds. This is how it works. When we hold writers' conferences, mystery conferences, or just writers' conferences in general, very often the conference will sponsor some sort of a literary or a literacy organization. And they hold an auction to raise money for that. And if you're an author, one of the prized auction items that you can offer is a character name in one of your upcoming novels. And so if you read a Cork O'Connor novel, you're going to see 2, 3, sometimes even 4 names in there that are real people. But they have been winning bidders in an auction, and I put them in the book. Now, whenever somebody wins a bid, I sit down with them and I say, okay, tell me about yourself, because I want to try to make you, if I can, as physically resemble you as you are. I want to be able to include some obscure details that people who know you will go, oh, that's him or that's her. And then I give them a choice. I say, would you like to be a good person or a bad person? What do you think everybody wants to be? Yeah, at least in the pages of a book. So yeah, I still do that. In fact, BoucherCon, the International Mystery Convention, is being held in Minneapolis next week. And I'm putting the auction item I'm putting up is what I call a bidder's choice. The winning bidder can either be a character in the next Cork O'Connor novel, or if the winning bidder is a writer, I will read 50 pages of your manuscript and critique it. And if you get it published, I will give you a dust jacket quote. Yeah. So we'll see. You know, it should raise $10 or so. Did I answer your question? And did you already know the answer before I answered it? You're a shill.
I think there was something about a minister's wife or something that you had done in one of the earlier books.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like two-pronged question.
Sure.
First off, you were in Lance. Did you have a sweet roll at the Hilltop restaurant?
Say that one more time.
In Lance, when you were in Lance, Michigan, did you have a sweet
Oh.
roll at the Hilltop?
I have never been to Lance. I have simply received an email. So you know the territory clearly.
The second question was, were you able to get into the Huron Mountain Club?
I wrote a book called Copper River, which is one of the 3 novels that takes place, Cork O'Connor novels that takes place outside Minnesota. It takes place in the UP of Michigan, just north of Marquette, where the Huron Mountain Club is. For those of you who don't know anything about the Huron Mountain Club, it goes way back to the days of Henry Ford and the robber barons. And this was a very rustic getaway for all of these very rich people. And it was a very secluded, well-patrolled, isolated place. That when I learned about it, of course, I had to put in a book. So yeah, I went up and did my research in the area. I didn't get onto the Huron Mountain Club. I was stopped at the gate, but I was able to talk to the people at the gate at length about the club and just learn some really, really wonderful things that eventually I put in the story itself. Are you from the UP?
No, we used to go up there quite a bit.
Okay.
I'm familiar with the area.
Yeah, it's very like northern Minnesota, very like northern Minnesota. What else? Yeah, over here.
I listen to a lot of audiobooks. Does the author have any say in how it gets read, or whether the book is going to be an audiobook or not? Or can you explain a little bit?
Sure. So the question is about audiobooks. Does the author have any say in whether it becomes an audiobook? If it becomes an audiobook, does the author have any say in who the reader is going to be? And the answer, generally speaking, to both of those questions is no. I have nothing to do with the audiobook sales. Those are part of what are called subsidiary rights. When I sell my manuscripts when I sign a contract with my publisher for my work, all of the rights are negotiated. So they get the right to publish the book. They will battle like hell to get the audiobook rights. Typically, they will hold on to the foreign rights for a particular period of time. The rights I hold on to with an iron grip are the film rights. So when for most of my work, we have also held on to the audiobook rights. And I have had 3 different audiobook companies deal with my work. Before anybody knew who the hell I was with a small audiobook company called Books in Motion, whose primary clients were over-the-road truckers. So in order to get one of my books on tape back then, you had to drive out to a truck stop in the middle of Nebraska. Then I was bought by, my contract was bought by a company called Brilliance, who, a perfectly wonderful audiobook company. And I was with them for several books. Then Recorded Books got my contract, and I've been with them for a very long time now. Now, in all of those companies, I had no voice in who the reader was. But I will tell you this, I auditioned to read my own work. I didn't get the job. But lately, things have changed. Because I'm doing pretty well as a writer, and they really respect me. I now have a say in who reads my book. So for This Tender Land, we got 3 audition tapes, and I was able to help choose the reader for that. A guy named Scott Brick. He does a great job. I have a. So I told you I wrote 4 novellas during the pandemic. The first of those novellas was bought by Simon & Schuster, and they're going to bring it out as an original audiobook next spring. And I just got 5 audition tapes for the readers and went through them with my agent, and we made a list. This is our first choice, second, etc. So now I do have a say in who's going to read. But let me tell you, it's kind of a heavy responsibility. Ooh, am I choosing the right voice for this? But I like that. I like that. Yeah, thank you for asking. Yeah, let's go here.
The last time I heard you were asked about movie rights.
Uh-huh.
You were encouraged by some discussions you were having, I think, if I recall correctly. Is there anything in the pipeline that's being produced or going to be produced?
Do you know, there are some days when I'm encouraged and some days when I'm not. So here's where we stand. Cork O'Connor, the Cork O'Connor series has been chopped around Hollywood for years and years and years. They have been optioned many, many times, but nothing has ever come of it. We are just now dealing with yet another company that would like to investigate the possibility of creating a series with the Cork O'Connor books. We'll see what happens. Ordinary Grace is currently optioned for one of the screens, large or small. Actually, it's being written as a multi-episode mini-series for one of the streaming platforms. I haven't seen any of the scripts yet, and it'll be really interesting when I see what they're doing with it. But don't hold your breath. We have dealt so far with, I think, 4 different production companies for the rights to This Tender Land. But here's what I'm afraid of. So many of my colleagues whose work has been translated to the screen have been terribly disappointed with the result. And if someone is going to take my work, I want to make sure it's someone who is going to maintain the heart, the spirit of my work. So I'm very careful in allowing the options to be picked up. So the guy who picked up the option for Ordinary Grace, it's about a Methodist minister's family. The guy who picked up the option is a minister's son. So I figured if anybody understands the story, it's going to be this guy, and he's just a wonderful guy. I haven't yet encountered anybody who has asked for inquired about the rights for This Tender Land that I click with, that I really trust. We haven't done any of the deals yet. We'll see. You know, I got to tell you, honest to God, I don't care if my books ever are translated. I'm really, really proud of my writing. And the last thing I want is for my work to be butchered, you know? Yeah. I saw a hand go up back there. Yeah.
So if a person has never read any of your books, where should they start?
Do you know, I'm going to betray Cork O'Connor here. If you have never read any of my work, I would prefer that you start with one of my 2 standalones, Ordinary Grace or This Tender Land. I love my Cork O'Connor stories, but I think those are 2 of the finest stories I will ever write. And so I would prefer that you come in on my strong points. And if you really like me as a storyteller, give the Cork O'Connor series a try. And there are 2 different entry points that you can do for the Cork O'Connor series. You can pick up a book called Lightning Strike. which came out last year. And it's a prequel to this series. And you need to know absolutely nothing about the Cork O'Connor series to enjoy that story. And it's a good introduction to all of the elements that you're going to find in a typical Cork O'Connor story. And if you like those elements and you like me as a storyteller, then I would suggest that you go to the first book in the series, Iron Lake, and buy every book after that. I'm being a little facetious there, but when readers ask me, where should I start? I typically say you should begin at the beginning and read through in order if you can, because the 19 books in the Cork O'Connor series span 15 years in the lives of the characters. So we watch Cork go from a man of 40 to his mid-50s right now. His children, who were quite young in the beginning, are adults now. They have lives of their own. So it's a much richer experience as you watch them grow and age and the relationships change and how they see each other in the world change. Much richer experience. But you don't have to do that, because every author of a long-running series understands that you may come to my work in the 12th or the 15th or the 19th book, and every story has to be able to stand alone. There you go. Maybe a couple more questions? Yeah.
So, a little lengthy, but you talked about your process when you write a mystery. You said you haven't all figured out before you ever, and I'm curious if that holds true for the other standalone novels, or do they evolve?
Oh, this is really a wonderful question. They've all been wonderful questions, but this is really a good one. Yeah, so the question really is about the difference in the process between the mysteries that I write and the standalones that I write, and the processes are very different. A mystery really is an intellectual construct. You are creating a puzzle. And so you're having to think all the time about how to make sure all the corners fit together neatly. My standalones come from a different place. They don't come from up here, they come from here. And I wanted the reader to understand, I'm telling you a story from my heart. And so I wanted an entirely different process. Going into the writing of Ordinary Grace in This Tender Land, I knew only a few vague ideas of what I was going to accomplish with that story. And I let those stories reveal themselves to me as I was creating them. And I have to tell you, those two processes, those two experiences were among the most extraordinary experiences I've had as a writer, because I so often felt like I was being given this story. It was coming from a place deeper than my conscious thought. When I finished Ordinary Grace, I thought this was the book I was born to write. I will never write a story as fine as this one. And then I wrote This Tender Land, which I love every bit as much. So the processes have been very different. Yeah, thank you. Okay, I see two hands. Why don't we take two more questions and then we'll call it. Okay, so in front, the first question. Yeah, go ahead. You started to stand up? Yeah, you. Go ahead and stand up.
I wanted to ask you if, how you do a lot of research, I guess, into your storyline so that you know about, you deal with a lot of social issues, in the
Uh-huh.
American community, and a lot of
So the question is about the research that I do, probably both for the Cork O'Connor novels and also the standalones, which have required a good deal of research. And does that inform the stories? You know, so many of my stories in the Cork O'Connor series, the issues at the heart of them have been suggested by my Ojibwe friends. They've asked me to write a story that would broaden awareness among white readers about this particular social issue. So, for example, one book in the series is called Wendigo Island, and it deals with the sex trafficking that occurs in large metropolitan areas that have a significant Native population, the trafficking of vulnerable Native women and children. And my friends in the Ojibwe community specifically asked me if I could do that. So I created Wendigo Island for that reason. And when I do that, of course, I have to do an enormous amount of research. So for Wendigo Island, I talk to trafficked people. I talk to women who deal with help heal women and children who've been trafficked. I talked to the cops involved in trying to stop the trafficking. I went out to Williston, North Dakota, where so much Williston, it's the Bakken oil fields, and anytime you have a boom like that, prostitutes, trafficked women usually will end up being pipelined there. So, I try to do due diligence in the research for this tender land, which opens in a Native American boarding school. I did an enormous amount of research on that particular topic to make sure that I got it right. Many of my friends in the Ojibwe community are my age or they're younger. They didn't go through the boarding school experience, but their parents did, or their aunties and uncles did, or their grandparents did. But to a person, when I asked them if they would tell me about what their relatives have told them about that experience, they said they simply refused to talk about it. It was so horrific, they don't even want to go back and talk about it. So I had to do a lot of research, digging to find first-person accounts by survivors who were willing to talk. So I take my research seriously, and I do a good deal of it. Yeah, you're welcome. Then I saw a hand go way in back.
Essentially asked the question, I was just more curious about the boarding schools and the research involved in there. And it's popped up in news lately.
Yeah. So we're talking, folks, if you don't know what we're talking about here, I'm not going to ask you to leave, so you can raise a hand. Who among you have not read my standalone novel, This Tender Land? Okay, so for those of you who haven't read the novel, that novel is set in the summer of 1932. It's deep in the Great Depression, and it opens at a Native American boarding school in southwest Minnesota. From the late 1800s until 1978, when the National Indian Child Welfare Act was passed, if you were a Native parent and the government came to you and said, we are going to take your children away, and we're going to cart them off to a boarding school hundreds of miles distant, and you will see them infrequently, or you may never see them again, there was absolutely nothing you could do about that. It was the law that you had to give the government your children. And these children were marched away to these boarding schools that were ostensibly created to train them in skills that would help them integrate into the white community. But in truth, they so often functioned as a source of free labor for the surrounding communities. They were ill-fed, they were abused, they were not allowed to speak their language. It was a horrific experience for so many kids. And I wanted to evoke that experience so white readers would know, because so many white readers had no idea of this tragic period in our history of our relationships with our Native brothers and sisters. But lately, the true story has been last year, Canada. We learned about the tragedies in the residential schools in Canada. Deb Haaland, our Secretary of the Interior, ordered a review done of the experiences here, and that's just beginning to come out. And I think what we've seen so far is just scratching the surface. More and more and more, we will hear about the tragedy of those years. Oh, that's sort of a down note to end this on. Does anybody have another question that we might be able to on an up note? Yeah, go right ahead.
Whatever happened to your booth at St. Clair Broiler?
Oh, yeah. So she's asking about my booth at the St. Clair Broiler. For those of you who have no idea what we're talking about, for more than a quarter of a century, I wrote all my books at the St. Clair Broiler, which is an iconic cafe in St. Paul, right at the edge of Macalester College campus. But a few years ago, the the guy who'd owned the broiler forever, a wonderful guy named Jimmy Thoreau, sold it. And the new people came in. They were perfectly nice people, but the first thing they did was remodel. And they just carved the heart right out of that wonderful, funky cafe. At about that same point in time, I moved to a different part of St. Paul, so it became problematic to get there. But I still went ahead and did all of my writing first thing in the morning, as I have always done. But when they were doing the remodel process, I got a call one day from the guy who was managing the cafe at that point, the new people, and he said, I wrote every day at the St. Clair Broiler in booth number 4. They always saved that booth for me. If anybody slipped in there before I got there, they kicked them out. I loved those people. But I get a call from the guy who's overseeing the remodeling. He says, Mr. Krueger, we're about to throw out booth number 4. Do you want it? My wife was standing there and she said, no, we don't. Thanks so much for coming out this evening, folks. I hope you had a good time.
Thank you so much. I wanted to say first apologies for mispronouncing your name.
Don't worry about
Okay. It's Slate now, S-L-A-T-E.
S-L-A-T-E.
I have a German maiden name. So
Anita
nobody-
Slot, huh?
Yeah, yes. Yes.
There, how does it feel?
I know. I had a German name. Well, that's a long story. So I married my husband because it was an easy name. No, I'm just kidding. Continued best wishes on your writing. And for more info on any of Kent's activities, go to williamkentkrueger.com. Thank you, virtual audience, for watching tonight. Chapter 2 Books is here selling his books tonight, if you don't already have some of them. If you would like a signed copy after tonight, online people, you can go to their bookstore or call Chapter 2 Books in Hudson. My next author event will be virtual. A Western frontier writer named C.K. Krueger, a different Krueger. Krueger? I didn't realize that till now. She has won a Spur Award for her recent writing, which is a Western award. So for more details, as always, go to riverfallspubliclibrary.org and click on library events, and you will see what's coming up, or pick up one of our brochures. Have a great rest of your evening, and thank you so much for all of you coming out tonight.